What is flow? For many of us, that state of pure engagement where we're completely into the thing we're doing, that we aren't paying attention to anything else, the worries we've had earlier, the frustrations, the state of the world, none of that is penetrating through. We're experiencing pure intrinsic motivation. We're painting this painting, we're digging up this garden, we're speaking in front of this audience, we're totally absorbed. It's the kind of thing where actually last week in Review Club, we were talking about inspirational leaders and how contagious they are. And Dylan, he was saying how, the thing is about these really inspiring leaders is they do what they do, even if they weren't getting paid for it, even if they were paupers, they would still be doing it. It's so important to them. Welcome to The Behaviorist with Work Wisdom, where we help you adopt high-performance mindsets, behaviors, communication, and culture. I'm your host, Sarah Colantonio. Today, we're turning our focus on sparking intrinsic motivation. I think of it as the nirvana of productivity and joy. And I'm so grateful to have Maria Hoover, the Director of Educational Services for the Capital Area IU. But also, Maria, you're part of our Work Wisdom leadership coaching team. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
And Todd Snovel, he is the Chief Leadership and Engagement Officer for County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania, also actor, also professor. Thank you for joining me today to talk about this.
I am so happy to be here and honored. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So today on the show, we want to explore how to intentionally spark this intrinsic motivation, this flow for ourselves and our team. So I'm really curious about what you all have to say about this. I think of the two of you as jumping into things with such energy. You have so much stamina. You're just always doing exciting things. So I feel like I am assigning you experts on this idea of intrinsic motivation. So the first question I wanted to ask is actually based off of this book, Love Plus Work, Marcus Buckingham, who we really love. He wrote this book a couple years ago, and he has this questionnaire he calls it the red thread questionnaire, but it's like the red thread would be the thing in your life that's so interesting and exciting for you. And some of the questions are amazing. So if you're open to answering some of these, one is, when was the last time you lost track of time? When was the last time you surprised yourself by how well you did? When was the last time you came up with a new way of doing something? Or when was the last time you felt completely in control of what you were doing? Maria, did any of those questions?
So the first question, say the first question again.
When you completely lost track of time?
Yeah. So I find that that happens a lot with me. Okay. In the work that I do.
Yeah.
Even in the coaching work that I do, there are a lot of times where, I will keep some sort of a general time frame of things. But when you kind of are really into that creative space or that innovative space or something that is really, really interesting to you, and for me in the education world, that's people, that's projects, that's how do I do things differently? How do we do things differently than we did before? And, even at the teaching level, every day's new. Yeah. Every single day. Yeah. Like sometimes morning, day, afternoon is new, right? So you're constantly having to think on your feet with things like that. So it is super easy to lose track of time. I would say just recently I was on a work trip, and we were in some really heavy discussion about some innovative things, and I was with superintendents from across the country. So just that space, to be in that space with all of those big thinkers, you blink your eyes and all of a sudden 2 hours have gone by and you don't even realize it. So as recently as last week, I would say that just in my work that happens.
Yeah. What is time?
Yeah. What is that? It's a construct.
Any of those questions spark your...
Yeah, for me, man, I reflect on a lot in those questions. So I think I would share very much the same. To me, a lot of these bring and evoke this sense of curiosity, which is something, boy, that happens with me a lot. And I think I am, a little bit ingrained as that person who will ask a lot of questions about why is it that we do it this way? Like, have we ever thought about a different way of doing it? I think about, I've been really fortunate to, in the world of education, belong to an international association as a member myself. And back in February, I was able to chair their annual conference. And so, in a situation like that, you're presented with literally years of sort of the schedules, the way of doing things, the standard operating procedures all around this idea of convention planning. And I think the beauty is matching that sort of foundational structure with that sense of curiosity of what if we actually tried something completely new, and how would that, be received, and how might we do that, and what's the ripple effect of doing something like that in decision making. But like, to me, when there are those moments that evoke that curiosity, that is when like time no longer matters, right? Like that will completely enrapture me fully in investing in everything I'm doing. And I think it's really interesting to pair that, with the question of, when did you actually feel fully in control of your schedule, of workflow, flow, all these things? And, even in those moments that take me away, it can be really hard, right? To fully say, I am completely disconnected other than this sort of vision moment, right? Because this thing's buzzing and this thing's dinging and somebody's staring in the window even though your door is shut. And so there's all those sort of things. So I wish I could say like there was this time that I can remember like, oh my gosh, 4 hours have passed and I've had no distractions, but I would probably not be fully honest if I said that.
And it's interesting. I was recently somewhere and listened to AJ Giuliani speak on AI. And the one thing that he had said to all the educators in the room was, we live in the age of distraction. And so everyone's connected at some point to something that is distracting them. So to hear you kind of say that like really resonates. So.
Yeah, because when I work backwards on this question of when I lose track of time or when I feel really in control, this happened, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, where I was about to give a workshop and I realized I had prepared for the wrong workshop, and it was 15 minutes before it was going to start. And I don't know how, I think it's from doing so many workshops, I snapped into laser focus. Nobody ever knew. It went really well. But there's no time to like check your phone or worry about what you're going to eat later. It is all about doing the thing in that moment. And I think that I think I do like presenting actually, because I do feel in control. I don't think of time as, I mean, I'm conscious of time because I know I can't keep them all day, but it helps me to really lock in. Does that happen with acting?
Well, it's funny. I have to say, you have just given the real life example of like the anxiety-based dream that each one of us have the thing of, right? So I have the dream still that I'm about to graduate from college and the registrar's office is like, there was this class you needed that you've never attended the whole semester, right? So I love that I was like, oh my God, that's the thing we all have. But it does. I'll say too, so as you pointed out, I'm doing some undergraduate teaching. Wow. Like, as a now person in my 40s who used to be like, look, I'm the cool faculty member that everybody relates to because I'm not that much older than you. And now you want a rude awakening of, how disconnected you are from 18 to 22-year-olds, be a person in their 40s now up there. But I'll remember, there are moments that I think, okay, I've worked an entire work day, quote unquote. And I'm going to literally have to kind of re-suit up, re-prep. And I got a 3-hour night class to hold the attentions of undergraduate students who probably would tell you after about 30 minutes they're ready to check out. And I have 3 hours with them. And so I'll sometimes have that feeling of, oh my gosh, like, is there enough content? Are we going to make this lively enough? Is it going to work? And then you just get in that stride, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I've given you no break, and we've gone 2 hours in. Let's take a 10-minute. So I agree with you in those moments of, just being able to sort of be in that privileged space of, I get to help you learn, but I get to help you connect and have discourse and dialogue. Like, all of a sudden time is like, oh, who knew 3 hours went by?
Yeah, that's so good. I love it. I'll ask the next question, which is, and maybe this is a really obvious question, why do you think it's important to operate with intrinsic motivation? And maybe you want to define it first, because I always think of it as this sort of internal motor that you don't need outside somebody encouraging you necessarily. It comes from within, and it feels so potent and powerful. So yeah, what do you think, Maria? Like, why do you think it's important, and do you want to talk about how you see it?
I think for me, in my context and kind of what I see in terms of motivation, there's a lot of people in the educational world who's like, it's really hard to motivate kids, right? My response to that is they're motivated.
Yeah.
They might not be motivated to do what you're asking them to do, but they're motivated, right? So then, taking that apart to the motive and the motivation. The motive is the why behind it, right? Why behind the action, and the motivation is the action or process to get to whatever it is you want to do. So if your motive is intrinsic and comes from a place of wanting, I'll make this up, but like independence, or wanting to get a promotion in your work, or, be a better leader, whatever that intrinsic motive is, then will dovetail into the motivation in terms of the action or process to get there. Yeah. So I kind of look at it as intrinsic motives are very important. Like, what is the why behind what I'm doing? Mm-hmm. So, in my work, in my family, like, what is the why? What are we doing here? And then how do we get there? And so I think if we focus a little bit more on that and not just the action, because the action is so short term, it's like the difference between a feeling of happiness and fulfillment. You got your short term and your long term. So I kind of look at this as the same thing. Yeah. So your intrinsic is your long term. So what is it that will, there's a book by Susan Fowler called Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does,
yeah. Right?
And so she talks in there a lot about the fact that you have to pursue consciously and purposefully. Mm-hmm. So if you're not feeling that purpose in whatever you're doing, then clearly your motivations are going to be different, right? And it doesn't say that you can't pursue external motivation either, your rewards, et cetera, higher paycheck, whatever. But I don't know that you can keep people motivated. I feel like they already are. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, I look at it a little bit like the fact that, especially in what I see, there's a lot of areas where leaders still are using those traditional approaches to motivation. Little, traditional techniques like, we're going to motivate you. We're going to make sure that we can get to the edge, the end of this journey, or whatever the case may be. But if you're really looking at optimal motivation, which is what the author talks about in this book, basically they teach leaders or show leaders how to move people away from dependence on the external rewards and help discover how their jobs or their work could meet their own needs in autonomy, relatedness, competence, those kinds of things, and that builds that intrinsic motivation. Yeah. So I think it's extremely important, and I also think it's, if you're going to find fulfillment in your work or in what you do, there has to be that intrinsic why first, kind of thing.
It's the only thing that will sustain you, right? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I think it's interesting. Like, for me, I can reflect personally on things that so much intrinsically motivate me that I fear and or resist the idea of getting some sort of external motivation,
Yeah.
right? Because that will suddenly change whatever that means in my fulfillment to something that all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there's something else here. But I think we often hear and hear the sort of lament on how do we create this in people, specifically from like an organizational way of thinking, because seemingly research tells us when, we hit this sort of magic formula that increases this idea of intrinsic motivation, it is what sustains our workforce. It's what retains and recruits the best employees, sort of all of these things. And I loved, already you've heard, to me, I think often the sort of catch-all that folks think about when it's how do we build this intrinsic motivation is around shared purpose. It's this, how do we really align mission, vision, values, and see that we are sort of contributing to a greater good and doing that work together. As somebody who reads too much research in leadership worlds, right? Sort of the hot wave of like, we all want to be transformational leaders now. Thanks, Ken Burns, for that. The research says like without intrinsic motivation, it almost will not work, right? It will not be able to get there because there isn't that deeper connection to the work. But what I love that you've already heard mentioned are, sometimes there are other environmental factors that can contribute so much to intrinsic motivation. So where somebody feels ownership and autonomy, where somebody might be able to develop mastery of a concept or new professional development. Or I know I'm watching a lot organizationally of folks that I get to work with who sort of in this post-COVID world are saying, what does continuity planning look like? And how do we get away from that? That is the one person who's had the historical knowledge of how to do that one thing for 35 years. And instead sort of say like, how do we learn aspects of each other's work and processes and sort of help to develop this sense of like, okay, like here is usually the lane where I contribute, but here's where it connects to all of these other places that kind of draw on this bigger bottom line mission, et cetera. And so I think sometimes where people have this more narrow, like, well, if I can't get somebody super hep on our mission, like there's going to be no intrinsic motivation. I think there's actually more ways of individually working with somebody to enrich that culturally than just sort of one basic strategy.
I fully agree. And I think so many times organizations rely on that traditional, like I'm gonna Google how to motivate people. Right. Oh, this will work. You know what I mean? And
who's the motivational speaker of the month?
Yes, exactly. Let's get that person. I think it is definitely. I do see that, but like to your point, looking at how they contribute, how they have a sense of belongingness in the organization, how what they do matters, will automatically give somebody that feeling of okay. I can do this, or I can do more, or I can do different, or we can think about this differently, and creating that space, I think, is super important.
I was saying earlier, I think you two are experts on this, and I'm wondering for yourselves, how do you think about it yourself? Like how you spark that? Do you work on it intentionally, or are you two just, it comes so naturally? How do you foster this for yourself?
I don't think you ever become the expert, so flattered, but also never going to adopt that. But I mean, I think in some ways it's a lifelong journey. Yeah. To maintain, to sort of analyze and evaluate, do I have the same levels of intrinsic motivation to the things that I used to? Is there an ebb and flow? Is there time and season? Are there new things that I, again, explore with curiosity that I think, hey, who knew this may be that space? And I mentioned earlier, like for me, there are also some things that are almost, I would use the term sacred in this way of like, I only want that to fulfill this kind of intrinsic motivator. For
Yes.
me, that truly is the stage. So for me, the world of theater, the ability to shed everything, every problem of this world and to assume someone else in some other world or time, like what a privilege. And that is my happy space to be able to do that. And so I don't want it tied to money, contracts,
Got it.
equity cards, right? Bigger stages, bigger dressing rooms, right? Like
Yeah.
I just say like I just want it to be a release for me where I get to entertain people and hopefully bring them some joy or some critical thinking for the next couple of hours, and then I get to go home and worry about how I'll pay the bills with something else. So
Yeah.
like for me, there are some of those things that I really draw the line to be like, nope, like I don't want that to ever be where I have to consider some of those more extrinsic motivations that are going to pay the bills or do whatever else. Like I
Yeah.
want to keep it very much about personal fulfillment.
Yeah.
And I think I'd look at it. So I think that space is very important. But I would say, just personally, I've had to learn that. I've had to learn to recognize it. In my profession, it is all about the other person. It's about fulfilling the other person. And so even when I'm speaking with other educators, it's really, really hard when you ask them who they are or how they fill their bucket or how they, get motivated or whatever the question is, right? A lot of times there's a long pause
Yeah.
because it's always done in terms of someone else. So really spending that time, and especially if you hold multiple roles, so, a woman in leadership at a predominantly male table, going home to be mom, right, to multiple beautiful children. But regardless, like you're constantly on. So months can go by before you even think, oh, maybe I should do something for myself. I can't tell you how many people in the last month I've said, I need you to press pause and I want you to think about what it is that you want to do for you to kind of regenerate and re-energize yourself. I don't care if it's 15 minutes. I don't care if it's 30 minutes. I don't care if it's a whole day. Once a month, you have to really think about that and reflect on that and what is that going to be?
Yeah.
Because that whole idea of time and space from the beginning doesn't always, like, you have to be intentional with that. Yeah. So I can say for myself, I have to spend time reinventing me, right? So, who I was as a teacher, I take elements of that and I move it into administration. I move it into the broader sense of leadership, and knowing that I'm going to reinvent myself again and again and again is that motivation for me, and it's the why, right? I've had to, and for listeners who are parents, that you have to reinvent yourself in your relationship with your kids as they get older.
Yeah.
So what they needed from me when they were in elementary school is not what they need from me in their 20s.
Yeah.
And knowing that is coming and having to do that. And I've talked to a lot of parents as well who struggle with that.
Yeah.
Because they miss that. They miss the old them.
Yeah.
And so, taking that time and saying, we really do need to focus on ourselves and focus on what will be that intrinsic motivation. What is your why? What is your purpose? I think it's okay to understand that that's going to change.
Yeah.
And put some energy into that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so, to me, it sounds like from both of you that there's some self-reflection that has to happen. You have to be aware of what's the pull for you, and if you know that you can keep feeding it. I was Googling, I was doing that. And, a lot of experts say that in order to boost intrinsic motivation, it's some of the things you've already talked about. You need to have a clear vision for your optimal future. I liked this tip. It was like finding your flow triggers. And I always think of triggers as a negative thing, but a trigger can be it can be the thing that gets you into, finally you're like settled in. And it could be anything. I mean, I think even my example of realizing 15 minutes, I mean, it was 15 minutes before I had to go on. That was a flow trigger. That was, and I think I must get more out of presenting than I even realized. But I was so focused. It actually did feel really good. I don't mean to say I'm going to do that again. I got to wait till right
now
before.
I have to rush.
Yeah. But to notice those things, again, requires reflection, removing distractions, taking care of your body and brain, having gratitude, being courageous. Give me your reactions to these tips, like, having the clear vision, finding your flow triggers, removing distractions, taking care of your body and your brain, having gratitude, being courageous. What do you think of these Google tips?
So they do resonate with me. Like they really do. Thinking about what a flow trigger would be, like that's going to really get you motivated. I still go back to the fact that, and the other thing that you mentioned that kind of stood out for me. So last week, this is going to sound so strange, but I was actually at NASCAR all week.
Oh,
with
were you?
superintendents from across the country.
I mean, if there is no better bonding experience.
Right. But there was their VP of innovations we met with, and he, and I'm going to give him, his name is Nick. I can't think of his last name right now, but I will. He said something in his presentation, and it stuck with me so much, and it kind of fits into this. And he said, move boldly, even if the path doesn't exist yet. Mm-hmm. So that kind of is that trigger for being courageous and being, getting into that flow and understanding that even though you may not have a clear path and you may not have a clear end goal, you have multiple pathways that exist. Mm-hmm. So try them out.
Yeah.
Give yourself that grace to do that.
Yeah.
I will go a little bit back to my example of the conference that I was just able to help organize. So we brought about 2,000 higher education faculty and professionals together in community in Long Beach, California in February. So there were some things on our side in location. And I will set the scene of bringing 2,000 higher education professionals together in a time that the structures of higher education feel like they could in any moment be starting to shudder and or collapse. Yeah. And literally at a time where, while on site, the Dear Colleague letter about DEI practices within higher education was released. And so there was a lot of heaviness that was felt upon arrival. And I think to what some of this tells us in flow was what we tried our hardest to practice and to say, we don't have all the answers, but there is power about being in community. You need to take time beyond just the professional development and education, and you need to go walk outside, and you need to feel California sunshine. I know I did, because Pennsylvania in February, I'm not getting very much of that. We built in literal wellness activities into the fabric of the convention experience as optional things. Take a wellness walk with a group of colleagues and get to know them. Go visit an outdoor location, feel some sunshine, do these things. Because we said, if we expect that we will go back to our campuses with this sort of renewed energy to get back into it, right, and do this work for the betterment of our students, we must use this time to truly sort of regenerate ourselves, to lean into self-care, to establish those boundaries, to, not be doing 22-hour days because we want to get the most in of everything possible. And so I think we heard so much from members that, just sort of hearing we encourage this, was this sort of refreshing renewal experience to say, oh my gosh, like, I'm not sure I've reflected on how much I needed this right now. And I think it is often, I would fully agree, it resonated so much with me, people who feel this, truly sense of anxiety, trepidation, fear of shutting down and doing something for them, and the fear of, I'll miss something, I won't be there for this, I'm going to, someone will need me, something will need done. But I think it is absolutely so necessary, and giving us those times to sometimes be able to pause and reflect and say, is this right for me? Like, are all these things still providing what I want them to, and is this the right balance of everything, or do I have to reflect on an aspect here or there shifting and changing?
Yeah.
That is so important. That resonates so much.
Yeah.
The question, well, what would happen if I did control my next step?
Ooh.
That question. So that question was asked to me, and my first reaction was, no one's ever asked me that question before. But boy, did it make me take a minute and say, and reflect on basically all the things that you just talked about. So, and say, you know what would happen if I did? Is this right for me? Is it not right for me? Am I just doing this? Am I motivated to do this? Do I have a why or a purpose behind this? Or am I just doing it because this is what I'm supposed to do right now?
Yeah, I think the thing that struck me so much was the part about self-reflection, that you have to let some other things drop away. Like, you do have to take some time away and relax and let your mind wander and rest and all of that. That's where you really can tap into stamina and flow and all those things. But you might not even think about, like, what is it that I really want? What am I doing? And so much of this comes down to what you all were talking about before, about when we're trying to motivate other people. We always have to come up here to motivate others. It's not the weeds. We're never going to get excited about that. We've got to go high level. What is the purpose? What's the vision? And what are we doing here? Like, what's the big deal here? And remember that to help us kind of get through the hard times. And because we do have the weeds, of course, that's going to be a thing. But we have to pull ourselves out of that and kind of look down. I'm wondering too, if a listener is thinking maybe they are so out of touch of what intrinsically motivates them, what they love about their work and getting up in the morning. I always think of it as, like, it's not just flow, it's like self-actualization. Like, why, why you're getting up and doing what you're doing. If they're feeling like, I'm not feeling this, I'm not intrinsically motivated at all, what's your advice if they're having maybe a dry spell?
I will say one of the things that I try to model is, at least, folks that are within my sphere, and especially teams that I get to work with, I point blank ask. Okay. And I will say, like, this is not, some sort of compliance report. This is not going to be punitive in any way. Like, how are you feeling? What are you super connected with? What do you feel disconnected with? I thought, Sarah, you said we can't necessarily get rid of weeds, right? We all end up with weeds. But one of the things that I found so rewarding is, again, when I have been in, roles where I can potentially help to shape policy, culture, when somebody says, I have one particular weed that just is where I lose all motivation, all energy. And is there a more innovative way we think across the team, across the division, across whomever, is there a way to shift that weed that's not just putting work on somebody else, but truly kind of like creatively looking at, is there a process there? I also love to talk to my team members to say, listen, what do you see as next for you? Whether that's 6 months, 6 years. And if there is desire to say, I'd really like to consider developing and growing to think about a role like X, I'll say, well, what can I start pulling you into so that you're developing and potentially taking on projects or initiatives that will start to give you that experience, right? So how might I be able to shift some things so that you can take some time to devote to, like, this stuff would really give me mojo and energy to kind of keep going. And so, like, to me, it is so critical when you are in a role that you can have those conversations with people, that sort of, you know, authenticity can come out, right? That psychological safety can be there for somebody to say, like, I'm not feeling it right now.
Yeah.
And I notice that about myself, and I don't know if you're seeing it in my work, but I'd love to see if there's a way that I can get more excited, get more into it, and let's have that conversation.
Yeah, I love that.
I think definitely a lot of what was already said, but I also I think it boils down to a few things for me, at least in the work that I do, and because there's a lot of weeds. There's a lot of weeds.
A lot of weeds.
And there are a lot of things that kind of can hit you from different angles that you're not really, there's no way to prepare for it, right? Yeah. So I think as a leader, I think one of the things that I find very, very valuable, especially with team, is creating the space and being deliberate in creating that space. You know, there's a lot of times where, you know, people say, oh yeah, come talk to me anytime, my door's open. That might work for some, but some you really have to be intentional in creating the space to have those conversations and empower those conversations as a leader. I think the other thing is to really focus on individual growth and have people really reflect on their growth and what they want and outside a position, you know, like leave your position at the door and tell me what you did. I asked a group of leaders a couple of weeks ago, what's the last new thing you learned? And then we went through like different steps of what the new thing was and why was it important and to learn it and what were your obstacles, but really creating that space and then understanding what growth could look like. My oldest son interviewed for a job recently, and they asked him one question. There was one question, describe yourself. That was it. And then they said, now I need you to ask us questions.
Wow.
Luckily, he prepared 5 questions. But, you know, the one thing that he talked about with them a lot was, can you tell me outside of just position and pay, what the growth opportunities are in this company? That was one of his questions. I did not coach him at all on that. I was very proud of him, right? But, you know, those are the questions that were coming out. Tell me the culture and tell me why you still work here. Yeah. Those were questions that, like, our 22-year-olds are coming up with. Yeah. They're not asking. They understand that there's positions that can be had. They may or may not be up for that. Maybe that is motivating them. But when he kind of shared with me what those questions were, it really took me back. And I'm like, well, that's really interesting because you're really asking about organizational culture. You're not really asking about what I'm going to do day to day. He's not asking about the weeds. So I thought about growth. And then I thought about the connectedness, which is really important organizationally and then with each other, like making sure we're deliberate in that in order to really help people within our organizations.
Yeah, we could probably do a whole other episode on that because it's so weird. We have such an epidemic of loneliness and separateness, and it's almost like it's like a cancer. It just grows on itself when you feel like that. You don't reach out. You don't want to connect with people, and that's exactly what you need to do.
Yeah. and you'll forget your why. You'll forget your motive in that.
Exactly.
So true.
I wanted to also say, as far as, you know, asking those questions of our teams. You know, I had this experience with one of our employees and checking in with him. And I feel like he was pretty honest with me about the things that he wants to push forward to. And it was so exciting for me to hear it. So I feel like employees should know that. Like, your bosses really want to know.
Right. We hope they really care.
Yeah, because it's, you know, if we can have workplaces where people feel that connection and they feel like they understand how they are contributing, that just feels good. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about productivity. It's about meaning and joy in the work that you're doing. And so if you don't know the answer to that, then you got to spend some time and think it through. I want to thank you both. I'm so grateful to both of you for being part of this movement to help others in the workplace enhance their individual and their collective team performance. Thank you so much for talking about intrinsic motivation and flow. Thank you, listeners, for downloading The Behaviorist. We hope you'll subscribe. Please contact us through our website, workwisdomllc.com, where you can enjoy Work Wisdom Press and productions, ask questions, and you can also give us suggestions of topics you'd like us to explore in the future. As is our custom, we will leave you a quote. This is from the prophet, and I'm going to mess up this guy's name. I'm so sorry. Khalil Gibran. Did I say that right? Anyone?
Khalil.
Okay. But this is a really good quote. And when you work with love, you bind yourself to yourself and to one another. Work is love made visible.